of the great mysteries of running a dental practice has to do with overhead. Most dentists don't understand overhead. Typically, when I get with a group of doctors, I'll ask them, what is your overhead? The typical response is, well, I have to talk to my accountant, or I'm not really sure, or I run a lot of personal things through my business, so it's hard for me to really tell exactly what it is. But I think we all agree is that whatever your overhead is, it's too high. So one of the myths I'd like to dispel today is that all overhead is created equal, because it really isn't. Overhead is very different and very distinct for each and every practice, depending on the mix of treatment and other factors. What I've drawn up here today is something that you probably have never seen before, at least in not a dental school, that I call it the overhead wheel. And what I've done is just kind of made some arbitrary divisions to show us and to demonstrate how overhead works in a dental practice. For example, give you an idea, we have some procedures that we do in our practices that are 100% plus overhead. In other words, we really lost money in doing the procedure process. That could be redos, that could be a screaming kid, that could be a root canal that takes too long. It could be a lot of different things, but really we'd like to kind of mark those out and not have them and pretend like those don't exist. But in reality, they do exist. Then we have a couple of other divisions. We have the 80 to 100% overhead. We have the 70 to 80% overhead. We have the 60 to 70%, the 50 to 60, and then we get around to less than 50% overhead. And what I mean by that is if this particular procedure is between 80 to 100% overhead, that means that for every dollar that you receive into the practice, you have to pay out 80 to 100 cents to do that procedure. For example, let's take the 80 to 100% overhead piece of the pie here. And probably the first thing that I think of is hygiene. Okay? Hygiene, as a general rule, is not a profit center. Now, we love hygiene. We want you to have a whole bunch of hygiene. But if you're looking for hygiene as a profit center, it probably isn't going to be there. Now, let's go to 70 to 80%. This is more of your old bread and butter dentistry that we talk about, sort of the nuts and bolts. These a filling here, a filling there, do a little bit of this, an extraction here. So there's kind of a variety of things. We get into the 60 and 70% overhead, which is obviously a lot better. We get into maybe one crown at a time. We get into maybe quadrants of fillings, or at least two fillings together on the same patient. But then we get into the 50 to 60% overhead, which is really where we'd like to most of us be. And you get into probably between 2 and 4, maybe 5 units of dentistry. And then we get into the really lucrative part of dentistry, which is less than 50% overhead. And this is where we always would like to focus. Now, if you were to go home and look at your own schedule book, look on your computer and divide up and look at all the hours that you put in the day, and this includes hygiene, obviously, which part of the overhead wheel would you spend most of the time doing? Down here or up here? All right, and which one of these sections do you spend most of your time? Well, most of us would say, gee, probably over in this area right here. At least that's what I hear a lot of dentists saying. And then the question is, well, if we know that this is higher overhead than this, why aren't we functioning in this area of overhead? So this part right here is where most of us spend our days. Now here's the question. Why on earth do we do that? Well, I think there's several reasons. Number one, it's easy to sell. But probably the most important thing, at least from my point of view, is the fact that this is what dental insurance will pay for. Anything above here, we have a hard time getting the patient to pay anymore, because the insurance company honestly has tricked us into thinking that this is all the patients are going to buy. And so we end up diagnosing, we end up presenting, we end up scheduling, we end up creating our systems based on running this kind of a practice. Okay? So the result really is, the B word we call that, is busy. The busy practice. The busy practice is not a profitable practice. The busy practice is a busy practice. And so in order to eliminate the busyness from your practice, you need to start looking into this area and say, okay, how can I create systems? How can I do case presentation so that I can get more of this and less of this? And if you can do that, you'll find that the stress will go down, you'll find the busyness will go down, you'll find the overhead will go down, but more importantly, the profit will go up.